Today I want to take a look at how to use the Sites.Selected for Graph API calls to one SharePoint site. And we're going to be making those calls from AngularJS. Here we are looking at a blog post from Mohammed, talks a little bit about the Sites.Selected permission. This is a scoping down for granular permissions to a given SharePoint site, or potentially more than one. Better than the old way of sites.readWriteAll, sites.fullControl. Granting an app access to every SharePoint site you have is a very large permission that could open some security concerns about confidentiality, changing of data, potentially thousands or millions of documents. What if our app just needs access to one site collection? So here we're going to take a look at the app registrations in Azure. We're going to make a new one called SP List Write. Our goal is to write to a SharePoint list. After creating the app, we're going to make note of the app ID, and we're going to generate a secret. Go ahead and give it a 24-month expiration, and we'll make note of the app ID and secret. On the left side, under API permissions, we're going to take a look at granting a permission for Graph, and I'm going to choose application permission on the right, and type in the word site. We have all of our traditional SharePoint permissions, but we also have this snazzy new one at the bottom, sites.selected. Hovering the bubble, it gives a little bit of instructional text about it. Granted, configure SharePoint Online, subset of site collections. That's what we want to do. We'll go ahead and click Add Permissions. Now at this point, it doesn't actually give it any site collection. It just sets it up where that's a possibility. So that's all we have to do in Azure. We've created an app ID, a secret, and told it we'd like to do specific site collections. Over in SharePoint, what we're going to do is create a new test list, just a standard SharePoint list, nothing special to it. And we're going to navigate over to Graph Explorer. Here we can do a lot of different things with SharePoint sites, but maybe we want to get a SharePoint site, SharePoint list, enumerate the list. Yeah, there's a few different choices here. Just on SharePoint list, you may want to enumerate the items within a given SharePoint list. Okay, it's saying 404, not found. Fair enough. Let's come over here and take a closer look at this list we just created. And for the one we just created, we're going to go into List Settings, and we are going to grab the ID number for that list, put it into our graph call. It echoes back an empty array here for value. Now, if I went in here and I added a new row and I called it manual test, we're adding something to the list manually. I can go to Graph Explorer. Now we have a lot coming back. And we have content types, we have who created it, all kinds of stuff. So yes, we are able to see our item, and we can talk to it from Graph. Now from a coding perspective, we're going to flip over and use this app ID and secret to get into the data. And here in VS Code, I've got a folder with a couple of simple files, HTML, JavaScript, and PS1. The HTML file has references to Crypto.js and AngularMen, not to be confused with cryptocurrencies. This is simply encryption for handling the secure strings, such as a client secret. And then here we have AngularJS 1. Why doing it that way? Well, it's kind of simple. It lets us mock up a controller in a very simple way. And the goal of this is to run a couple of HTTP post transactions. There will actually be two of those. The first is to log in, and the second is to access data. So on the JavaScript side, we have a couple of different things going on. We have a write SharePoint list. We have a single controller and a helper function. So this code will be on GitHub, but top down, the Angular controller has a function for getting a token. And getting a token is something we do with Graph API. So here you can see we're sort of preparing a lot of the different code blocks. And on this, we have a block here to log in with our ID and secret. For right now, we're going to skip over the encryption pieces, keep this simple, take the client secret, direct, and add it here on the line with client secret. We need the app ID to go into line 33. And that's how we're logging into the tenant. This login's a little bit interesting because we're doing a form URL encoding. So this is not JSON, this is a form URL encoding. To make that work, we need a helper method up here. And there's a little article that explains it, but it basically encodes the data for form URL post. So we're going to send a form URL structured post over to our login.microsoft endpoint. The whole point of this is to get a token. When this thing comes back with an access token, then we are able to actually use the Graph API. So what this is doing is it's logging the app in and saying, here's my app ID client secret. Please give me a token. And if I have that token, then I can go use it. So first things first, let's see if we're able, now that we put in the secret, to actually get the token running. With this folder, we have an index.html file. I'm going to type in light-server. That's going to start a localhost 3000 website. And here I'm looking at Chrome with CORS disabled. This is a special session of Chrome where their cross-origin resource sharing is turned off. What that lets me do is make data calls to lots of places without the browser warnings. So CORS is disabled in this session, and we're looking at localhost. And what do we have here? An access token. So this is just that first JavaScript function. So HTTP post number 1 gives us the access token. And having that access token will then allow us to go make data calls to MS Graph. And it's kind of cool because you can open F12 on the side here. You can see that it's logging in, the tenant name, token, got a 200 OK. If we investigate into the response, you can see a couple of different things here, including the token value. And I put it over here on the view for debugging purposes. Even in the source code, we can come over here, find the callback function, and reload the page. And you can drill into the response and see the access token that way. And I went ahead and put the token on the screen so we can look at it. And then here with HTTP's defaults, what we're doing is we're putting this on all traffic. What that means is that all HTTP traffic Angular is going to transmit will have this bearer token value, and the header is named authorization. So pretty cool stuff, creating a header that we can use. Excellent. Let that continue. Now, on our app, we do have a write button, which ties to this JavaScript function. And that's going to need an edit. So we just created a list, and we were using that ID. Yeah, we're using that ID earlier. So we'll go back over. We're using it in Graph Explorer. We want to grab the ID of the list, put that in the JavaScript, and the goal is to write an item on the list. So here's the site I'm trying to get into. Here's the list I'm trying to get into. I want to create an item. I'm going to post it to Graph. And when we do that, we give it the site ID, the list ID. Okay. Now, because we have pre-wired Angular in the background here to have our bearer token, this should be on all HTTP traffic. So we should be authenticated and taken care of, which lets us focus more on the user data and then what specific list that we are targeting to add an item. So with all that in place, we'll come over and we'll hit our Write SP List button. Got a message here. 403. And if we drill into it, access is denied. It says no go. You're logged in, you're trying to add something, and it's blocking it. The reason why is we have not granted the specific site. That's what we're going to do next. Now, to handle the specific grant, we need to know our app ID from what we got out of Azure when we did our app registration. We'll pick out a display name of what app we're working on, and then what's our permission level? Write. I'd like to write to that specific app, and then we have a SharePoint site. Now, a lot of times when you're using Connect PNP Online, you're going to run this command and it's going to connect to the admin endpoint when we're doing general administration work. We want to look at all the sites in the tenant, that kind of thing. Here, we're logging into one specific site, and it's very intentional. In this case, it might be the root, just the site that's at the root level, but that's not always the case. This could very well be sites, team one, whatever, but our connect is going to be tied to where we are trying to grant the permissions. All right, with that in place, we can go ahead and run the next command here, the grant permission. All right, it's kicking back with an error, so let me go ahead and run import and give it that. Interesting. Having a little trouble with this on VS Code, so let's switch over to more of a normal PowerShell window, and we'll run things over here. And we get away from the VS Code run space. We'll do a clean PowerShell window. So we're doing our Connect PNP Online first, and then our grant command second, and it echoes back with the name of the app, the ID number, that's our app ID, from Azure, right? FE79, that number matches up, and it completed the grant. And it kind of echoes back the second command. So it's really simple stuff. It's only 2 commands: connect to the site and then grant that app ID number. And it's very fine-tuned. You want write permissions for this one specific site. You want read for this other one. You can run this grant command as many times as you need, loop it through sites, all that good stuff. Let's go back over to our browser. We're going to reload our screen. We're going to click our Write button. Looking into our network traffic, we see a 201 created message doing our exact same HTTP traffic we were before. Coming into our SharePoint site, we see hello world selected.sites. This was created from our button click in JavaScript through Graph API with Sites.Selected, where you're granted for only one target site. We're not granting the whole tenant. So it is possible for a freestanding JavaScript app on a button click to go get a token and add an item to a SharePoint site. You don't need any middleman, no Azure website, no Azure function. This is a freestanding JavaScript app. I click the button and it puts something onto a SharePoint list. A lot of different use cases for that. One final detail, if we edit our view and check out the columns that are available, there's this stuff that's kind of interesting. App created by, app modified by. So let's go ahead and turn on our normal created by, our normal modified by, and an additional pairing called app created by. That should look familiar because if we come over here, it pairs up with the name that we gave the app when we did the Sites.Selected grant. Now, I find that interesting because that may have implications for support, that when we're doing this granular model, we can go ahead and name the app for that specific site collection. And that's interesting because that may actually help with like a point of contact, or who do we get in touch with, where these data changes coming from. So when you're granting Sites.Selected in the granular model, go ahead and name your application. Keep an eye on these new columns called app created by, and it'll help with the support. Thanks for watching.